Where did the inspiration for the seat of the soul come from? Where does something begin and where does it end? Beginnings and endings were part of the old consciousness. The old consciousness was limited to the five senses, to what can be seen and heard and tasted and touched and smelled. The new consciousness is not limited to the five senses. That means you have access to experiences and information that the five senses cannot provide you. I met a friend, and the friend said, "I'm speaking with a non-physical entity. Would you like to meet it?" I, who had never had any belief, interest in these things at all, I said yes. Why did I say yes? This was my first experience with a non-physical entity. I'd never experienced anything like that. That got my attention completely and permanently, and I realized I'm not alone. It's impossible to be alone. Hello. It's good to see you again. Today we're going to be talking about where the inspiration for the seat of the soul came from. It came from the universe. The first thing I want to tell you, that was the first. The second is, it didn't come from me. And so I suggest that as you listen to my podcast, that you not take anything that I say as so just because I say it. Now, I would suggest that you not take anything that anyone says as so just because they say it, even if they've written books, even if they have a big congregation, even if they have a television show. It's your life. So instead, listen, and if you hear anything that you resonate with, then experiment with it. Take it into your life, apply it, and see what it produces. And if you like what it produces, experiment some more. And if you don't, let it go. Don't try to wear a shoe that pinches. What I'm sharing with you is a window through which I've come to see life, and I hope it will be helpful to you. I am not the author of any of the things in any of the books, events, programs, and courses that we've created. I'm a co-creator, but the content did not come from me. I didn't co-create the content. Where does something begin and where does it end? Beginnings and endings are part of the old consciousness. They're not part of the new consciousness. The old consciousness was a consciousness that was limited to the five senses, to what can be seen and heard and tasted and touched and smelled. And when someone in the old consciousness couldn't detect something with any of those five senses, then that person considered it as not existing, as illusion or delusion or hallucination or New Age propaganda. That's the old consciousness, limited to the five senses. And it had its own understanding of power. That's the ability to manipulate and control. The new consciousness is not limited to the five senses. That means you have access to experiences and information that the five senses cannot provide you. For example, you have a sense or a hunch or knowledge that you are more than a mind and a body, that you have a part of your personality that is immortal. That means it existed before you were born, and it will continue to exist after your soul goes home, after your personality or your incarnation, these are the same thing, die. When they die, when your incarnation dies, when your personality dies, it's gone. It's dead. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. But the energy that animated that incarnation, it doesn't. It's there. That's the immortal part. And as we begin to experience the new consciousness, we resonate with this By the way, the new consciousness also comes with its own understanding of power. Its understanding of power is alignment of the personality with the soul, with harmony, cooperation, sharing, and reverence for life. The new consciousness is a gift from the universe. We don't have to develop it. It's emerging in hundreds of millions of us. But authentic power, the new understanding of power that comes with a new consciousness, is not a gift. It's a potential, and we have to create it if we're going to experience it. And everything that Linda Francis, my spiritual partner, and I have written, created, and shared comes from the universe. So I talked about beginnings and ends because the new consciousness is introducing us to a wider, more inclusive consciousness and is moving us in a direction, the direction of that wider, more inclusive consciousness that has a very surprise, I won't say destination, but that would be an old sensory, a 5-sensory word for it. But since I'm here in the Earth School, that's the domain of time and space and matter and duality that you're in, I'll talk about beginnings, and I'll just pick one arbitrarily. The one I'm going to pick is when I started writing my first book. It was called The Dancing Woolly Masters, and it's about quantum physics. I was writing a book about quantum physics, which I didn't know anything about or care about, because I was invited to a meeting of physicists at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, which is above the UC Berkeley campus. And I was living in San Francisco. And I went because I wanted to meet some physicists. I'd never met one before. And I wondered what they were like. And I was invited to an informal Friday afternoon meeting called the Fundamental Physics Group, created by a wonderful woman, Elizabeth Rauscher. She was sort of rotund and jolly, and I really loved her. And she's a physicist herself. And she spelled the name of the group, the Fundamental Physics, FYSICS group. So she had a lightness, quite a bit of lightness about her. And I went. And the physicists there that afternoon were discussing this question: are we creating the reality that we're experimenting with? Wow. That really got my attention. Not the question itself, but the fact that my small group of friends were discussing that very same question, in a coffee shop in North Beach. And these physicists were not having a coffee shop conversation. They were seriously discussing, to the best of their ability, the reality of nature. So I left that meeting so excited. I couldn't explain what excited me. I had to go to used bookstores and buy books on physics and start to read them until I finally began to get a glimpse of what was so exciting. I mean, I felt like I had 3 cups of cappuccino and sparks were coming off the ends of my fingers, but I couldn't explain what was exciting me. So I started to learn, and I asked Elizabeth if I could come back again next Friday, and she said yes. And I did. And eventually I began to understand. And then I thought, I'm going to write a book about what I'm discovering for liberal arts majors like me, for people who don't know science, don't know mathematics, and really don't like either one. Because I was getting this delivered in a wonderful way, and I wanted to pay it forward, give it forward. That book became The Dancing Woolly Masters. I started writing, and my writing progressed at about 1 chapter a month. I started each chapter with an outline, so I'd know where I was going to go. But as soon as I started writing the first chapter, the outline seemed boring to me, and something else was more exciting, so I just went there. And then I finished. Or actually, the chapter finished. That was a new experience to me. I didn't know the chapters decided when they come to an end, but they do. They've got their own energy. After 6 months, I had begun to have a dim awareness of something that then popped into my mind, and I saw it. These chapters all feel as though they were written to be together. They're connected to one another. But how did that happen? Because I threw the outlines away. I had 6 chapters and I threw 6 outlines away and went with where the energy went, and now they're fitting together. How did that happen? That was when I discovered non-physical reality. I didn't think about it. I didn't figure it out. It happened. And I realized I'm not alone. It's impossible to be alone. I'm co-creating this. It's not possible to create alone because it's not possible to be alone. And it wasn't mysterious. It wasn't any kind of esoteric experience. It was there. It was everywhere. It was there. That's one of the ironies of my life, that I discovered non-physical reality while I was writing a book about quantum physics. But that's how it happened. So from that point onward, I knew that whatever I wrote, I would be co-creating, that I was co-creating every second without knowing it. As you've seen, as I've described, this is not a process called channeling, where I would close my eyes and sit in front of a keyboard, and then there'd be a book or a message or some wisdom to share. It wasn't like that at all. I had to work at it, but it wasn't work. It was fun for me because I love language. I'm not a linguist. I could be in another lifetime, I think. But I love clothing energy with concept, with words. So it was a joy for me to learn about quantum physics and then to express it in a way that could be supportive of people. I decided that I wanted this book to be a gift on a silver platter. That image and those words kept coming to me. It was satisfying to write, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot. That's why people enjoy reading it, because it was so much fun to write. So now I knew about non-physical reality, but it wasn't until quite a bit later that that awareness took another step in me. I had a contract to write another book for my publisher, the one that, well, for a new publisher. And in that time, non-physical reality became more real to me. And as it did, my life became richer. But it didn't happen quickly. This is why I'm answering the question, where did the inspiration for the seat of the soul come from? In the way that I am, so that you won't think that it was a moment of enlightenment, like I think some people like to think happens. Maybe it happens to them, but it did not happen to me. It took a long time. It took work on my part. I had to learn how to do what I was taught how to do. And that was coming a little later. So now I'm living on a ranch. I wanted to be away from people completely. So I found a ranch in the middle of 75,000 acres of timber that was owned by a large paper company. And no one was logging it. And no one was going to, because it had been logged 3 years earlier. And that fit me in what I wanted just right, to be away from people. And while I was away, I was working on this book that was 7 years late, already overdue. Then I met a friend. And the friend was traveling back and forth sometimes to the West Coast. And we connected in Reno, which I was there for a while, a short while. And the friend came over, and where I was staying with another friend in a larger house, and we found a place that was quiet, and the friend said, "I'm speaking with a non-physical entity." She said it playfully. "Would you like to meet it?" And I said, "Yes." Why did I say yes? This is also part of the story. After the Dancing Wu-Li Masters was published, it won the American Book Award for Science. It got published everywhere, every book club, and started to be published around the world in different languages. And because of that, I was invited to a conference in Sweden, and I accepted. Except that before I could go, I broke up with the woman that I wanted to think of as my partner. And I was distraught. So I called a friend, a Jungian analyst, Robert Johnson. He's written several books. And he said, why don't you go into the desert? We know an old lady who has a house there, and she lets us use it for retreats. So you can go there and become enlightened. That's how it usually happens. He said it just like that. He's very laconic, not very social, and he's abrupt like that. So I went to the Anza Borrego Desert in August. It was really hot. And I checked into this house, and I learned a lot of things there. I learned how to understand my dreams. I had 4 of them that guide me to this day. And by the end of that time, I decided I would go to Sweden and take this talk, because before I thought, no, I'm in no condition to even travel there, much less present there. So I went. And we got picked up at the airport outside of Stockholm and driven to an elegant little hotel in the forest. And there the conference organizer came to greet us and said, welcome, welcome everyone. Everyone is here. All of the Swedish companies are here. The telecoms are here. The banks are here. Volvo, Saab. And I have a surprise for you. So we were all jet-lagged. I was jet-lagged. And I thought, oh no. He took us to a room, and there was a man, a middle-aged man, sitting on a chair on a riser, and beside him was a younger man, his son, and the translator. And the middle-aged man closed his eyes and seemed to become someone else, someone much older. And the son was translating whatever words came out to us into English. This was my first experience with a non-physical entity. I had no patience for it at all. I just wanted to go to sleep. And I did. The next morning, Jan came again and said, oh, and the man's name was Ambros. Ambros said he's a 3,000-year-old Egyptian. I learned that later. And Jan said, you can speak with Ambros anytime you want. Let me know. I didn't realize how many people in Sweden were lined up to speak with Ambros. So even though my experience of Ambros was shallow as it was, I decided to investigate, so I went. Back to the same room. The middle-aged man is still there. The son is still there, but I'm the only other one in the room. And the middle-aged man becomes Ambros again. And the first thing Ambros asked me was, the first words he spoke was, how did you learn to understand your dreams in the desert? Oh, no one knew I was in the desert, except Robert, but he didn't know what happened. I had gone home afterwards to visit my parents because I couldn't stay with Robert then. They didn't even know about a desert. But Ambros asked me how I learned about my dreams in the desert. That got my attention completely and permanently. I'd never experienced anything like that. And we talked. And we talked a long time, and everything that Ambros said was relevant to me and helpful. But the thing about Ambros that I can never forget is how human he was. He was the most human consciousness I've ever been with. He felt so warm, so present, so comfortable. Ambros explained this to me. He said in the desert, I explained to him what I learned and what I could to answer his question. And he said, a little light, a little spark has been ignited in you, but it's small. It's like a candle in a cathedral. And you have to keep the candle alive. And I said, that frightened me. I said, can it go out? And Ambros said, yes, you could fall. And I said, well, how can I keep the candle alive? And Ambros said, speak with people. You must speak with people. And I said, but Ambros, that's what I can't do. When I got out of the desert, I couldn't talk. I'd been with myself, so deep into myself. When I get food at a little store and the cashier would say, good morning, sir, I was overwhelmed. And now Ambrose was saying, I must speak with people. And he said, you must do more than speak with people. You must want to speak to people. And then he held out both his hands to me, and I took them. And I was surprised at how much strength this presence that says it's 3,000 years old had in its hands. And he said, will you speak with people? And I had to consider that, but I knew in the next moment, yes. And I told him, yes, I will speak with people. And he squeezed my hand even tighter and let them go. And that's how our conversation ended. Then I opened the door, walked out of the room, immediately into a group of people right outside the door who were talking. My intention had immediately put me into a place where I had to practice it. And so I said, hi. And that's how I began to start to speak to people again. So now you can fast forward that a little bit to my friend coming to see me in Reno and saying, I speak with a non-physical entity. Would you like to meet it? Yes, of course. My only experience with this before was Ambrose, whom I didn't believe in before I interacted with him. I saw him one more time in Sweden, and I said, Ambrose, why do you have to speak to me through a translator who puts what you say into English? And in the reverse, when I talk to you, can't you just speak to me directly? And Ambrose said, yes, I could. But could you understand me? Could you hear me? And I knew as soon as he asked the question what the answer was. I couldn't. Now I was in Reno, accepting another invitation to experience yet another non-physical teacher. I, who had never had any belief, interest in these things at all. And so this was yet another step that I was going to take. But I'm going to save that step for you for another episode, because in itself, that has a richness and a power that has been with me and is with me for 40 years. Thank you for this beautiful question. You know, we look at, as we choose questions, I choose questions. It's questions that are asked most often. And this is a frequent question. And I'm happy to begin to explain it to you and to all of the people who have read The Seed of the Soul and the other books that I and Linda Francis have written. And if you haven't read them, I suggest that you do. But if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you have. And so we'll pick up this conversation on the next episode. I'm looking forward to being with you again.